Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. Today we're going to talk more about the Chris Watts case. The discovery has been released, and it is a tale of sex, lies, and murder. Let's talk about it. Today we are going to be jumping back to the Chris Watts case because something significant happened over the weekend. The district attorney has released all of the pages of the discovery to date, some 1,960 pages for review. It doesn't include all the videotaped interviews, but it consists of a lot of information, and it provides a lot more insight than what we had previously about this case. This is a case about sex, lies, and murder. First of all, I tried to provide this information to you while I was gone out of the country, but unfortunately, due to technical difficulties on my part, that did not quite come to fruition. So I am redoing this, and I had to take a slight detour to take care of a family emergency, but we're trying to get this done. I appreciate you being patient, and I appreciate you subscribing and watching this channel. So let's talk about the discovery. Obviously, this has been very interesting and a lot of talk going on about it. But I want to make this absolutely clear, all right? We are trying to do an objective review of the discovery, all right? We're not here to simply say we're fans of Shanann, we're fans of Chris Watt. I am a fan of neither. I simply want to be able to provide an objective view of the discovery and look at it from both sides. What would the prosecution have to do to make this work in their favor? What would the defense could have done? And as we've talked about, everybody knows Chris Watts pled guilty last week, 2 weeks before, and has now been sentenced, so it really doesn't matter. He has pled guilty. He is convicted, all right? The other reason why I wanted to look at the discovery in detail before we made any comments on it is that a lot of people jump on one little fact and somehow take it out of context. For example, I was given a lot of grief about what was said about the BAC level. Well, ladies and gentlemen, and I put it in a lot of the comments, the report in the autopsy says BAC, all right? It doesn't say BAC as a result of decomposition. It says BAC, all right? And the reason why it says BAC is that's what it is. That is a fact. And if I had that corner on the witness stand, I would have him simply say the BAC was a .128. Correct, doctor? Yes, he would have to agree. The reason it doesn't say little asterisk as it relates to the BAC is because he cannot say with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that that came from decomposition. It very well may have. It may not have. But guess what? He has to put in there what he can prove and testify to. All right? Everyone would have a BAC in their bodies upon death, and that's simply not the case. I can pull out lots of autopsies that I've worked on over the years and had to review as a result of cases where it says BAC 0. And the reason being is, ladies and gentlemen, is that when you die, your body stops metabolizing what is there. The heart's no longer functioning, the organs aren't functioning, it stops, and it basically freezes what exists at that particular time. So I'm sure I'll get a lot of comments from people saying, you can't pronounce a medical term correctly, why are you being a hater? I'm not being a hater. I'm just looking at the facts, okay? And we'll just leave it at that. So let's talk about the discovery. I think the first thing that we need to talk about here is that Shanann really did not know or anticipate, I think early on when she went off to North Carolina, that there was real trouble in the marriage. Clearly, Mr. Watts and his girlfriend had Miss Kessinger. This is why we kind of call this sex, lies, and murder. Apparently, the sex must have been really good because it rocked Mr. Watts' world to the sense that he was simply completely infatuated and in love with Miss Kessinger. She seemed to also be just as infatuated and into Mr. Watts as well, based upon her own statements, based upon how many times they met. Basically, they met and they had sex. And she described that it was many, many, many times per occasion that they would meet. It was described as to the lies of where they were going, why he would always use gift cards to pay for the dinners. For example, on the Saturday night before Shanann returns, Chris Watts gets a babysitter for his girls. And he had also been to the birthday party early on. Everybody thinks everything is fine. And what happens is that Mr. Watts on Saturday gets a babysitter to go to, he says, a baseball game with some friends. And Shanann gets a text alert warning from her bank saying the dinner from the Lazy Dog was some $69. And she talks with her friends about it, and they try to console her and say, well, it's probably nothing. He probably just bought beers for the guys and things like that. Anyway, I thought that this $69 spending spree was just a little too out of it. But it was interesting is because up to that point, most of the money spent by Mr. Watts was in the form of gift cards, so that obviously the wife wouldn't know. But apparently on that particular night, he didn't care. He did not care if she knew about it. And like I said, so Shanann and her friends, and they detailed this to the police through text messages that they thought, oh, everything's fine. It's probably just him going out with the guys and bought a round of beers and what have you. And she said, no, he wouldn't do that. As things go on, she grows more concerned. Shanann describes how when they were in North Carolina that Mr. Watts refused to have sex with her, and she was suspicious but didn't know and just figured, oh, it was kind of it was a growing pains in the relationship and it would be okay. I don't think she really had any idea of what was going on. She was so driven to make her career work that I think that, frankly, he got lost in the shuffle of kids and doctor's appointments and schools and Thrive videos and whatever. And he was just, make sure you get the lawn mowed and whatever. And, that happens to a lot of people in lots of relationships. Things focus on the children. I think he states in his interview to the police that it was always about the children. Well, guess what? If you've ever been married, you ever had children, that's part of being married. Everything is about the kids, okay? And if you ever notice why everybody gets divorced after the kids go to college, because you sit there and wonder, who are you now? And why do we still like each other? And so I think that's what happened to Mr. Watts here in this particular situation, is because he felt neglected. He felt he wasn't being paid attention to. Nobody cared. Nobody cared about his hobbies. He apparently liked cars a lot. He described himself as a motorhead. Other people described him as a motorhead. But he didn't even have his own car. They went through their bankruptcy, so he was driving the Anadarko Petroleum truck around. Shanann had a white Lexus that they were leasing. And so, this guy really didn't have much. And when he would go on dates with Miss Kessinger, they would go do stuff that he liked to do, like go to Bandimere and watch the races and things of that nature. Somehow I don't think I'd get to see Shanann there doing that with him, but it really doesn't matter. And please understand, I'm not saying that any of this is any excuse to go kill your wife and children, okay? Absolutely not. Just trying to give a little bit of perspective here, what's gone on. And so when you read through this discovery, a couple things obviously jump out at me when I read it. First of all, Miss Kessinger, she gave several statements to the police, okay? And the statements that she gave to the police were the first one was kind of really vague. Her father was present. Then she did a couple of telephone interviews. And at one point, she actually brings all of the clothing and items that she had of Mr. Watts at her apartment, and she wanted to give them back. And then she was going to provide her phone dump to him. But at some point, she's also detailing how she has deleted all of his information that she had in text message and things of that nature from her phone because she was upset. And once she figured out that this man probably murdered his wife and children, that she didn't want anything to do with him. But it was clear that these two wanted to be together. It was very clear that they were planning on spending their life together. And as I stated in an earlier video, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when the two of them were talking about the case. And in fact, Miss Kessinger goes through at one point and is literally giving advice on where the children should be going to school, helping them with the apartment, alimony, maintenance, providing them all these advice on everything that should be taking place in this divorce because they were going to be together, ladies and gentlemen. That was the goal, okay? Now, is there anything, a smoking gun in here where it says, the girlfriend said, go kill your wife if you want to be with me. That's the only way I'm going to be together with you. I don't want your children, etc. No, I don't think so. There's nothing like that. In fact, friends of the girlfriend actually say that of Miss Kessinger that she liked children. She sent text messages to her friends saying, hey, I found this guy. He has kids, and basically the sex was great, and the oral sex was even better, and he rocked her world, and vice versa. And I'm saying these people were going to be together. And I truly believe Chris Watts killed his wife, and he pled guilty to his children. So whether that happened or not really doesn't matter, because he pled guilty to that. And as a matter of law and as a matter of fact, that's it. It's done. And what matters is that why he did it. He thought that he was going to be together with Miss Kessinger. That's what I think comes from this, is that he wanted to start over again. He wanted a new life. This guy, for lack of a better term, couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle life. He had financial issues, whether it was his wife or whatever. Maybe he couldn't stand up to her spending. Who knows? He wanted a do-over. His children, I'm sure he loved his children. I hope he would have loved his children. But they had health issues, and it seemed like it was always something. And guess what? Life sucks sometimes. And that's just a part of being an adult. And you don't go around killing people to get that fresh start. You get a divorce, okay? But you take care of your responsibilities. You don't go kill these people. But that's the other thing that rings through, is he wanted to go do a do-over and start with Miss Kessinger all over again. And what I think is interesting is, and I'm not saying this, that she's not going to do it, and I'm not trying to get sued by anybody, because I'm not saying she did anything, but I think that a reasonable person could look at this information that she provides, Miss Kessinger provides to the police, the information, although she came forward to the police, she's the one that said, hey, I think I have information, I think something bad has happened here, let me help you. It's interesting that she was very selective in the information that she gave, and it was followed up by later information where she provided new information that she hadn't provided previously. And I think it was their first interview was to the FBI. And I think, as we've all learned in today's world, lying to the FBI is not a good thing. People get charged if they're untruthful to the FBI. Martha Stewart did not go to prison for insider trading, which she was being investigated on. She was charged with lying to the FBI. In today's world, people aren't being convicted for conspiring with the Russians in the Mueller investigation. They're pleading guilty to not being truthful and candid with the FBI. And so you have two options when you talk to the FBI. Either A, tell the absolute truth, which may not get you very far, may not do you well, or two, you keep your mouth shut and you don't say a word. But there's a thing in the law: anyone who aids, encourages, abets, or assists somebody in the commission of an offense, if you know that the offense is going to take place and you do something, you can go and encourage them, say, hey, you should do it this way. You should do it that way. Wow, I think I'd do it this way. Let me give you the gun, something along those lines. And you can be charged like you had done it yourself. Okay, so if you're cheerleading, you're rooting somebody on, you're giving them advice, okay? There's a lot of advice on what Mr. Watts should be doing for the divorce, for anything related to ending his relationship with his wife. And I think it's very unusual in today's world that Miss Kessinger has stated that she didn't know he was married. She said at some point, she qualified that well, she knew he was separated, he was almost getting married or not, but he simply was not. And in today's world, I think she says she doesn't have any Facebook accounts, but another portion of it, I believe I read that she had deleted her Facebook portion once this was all coming forward, or she was receiving threats or something along those lines. Everybody looks at, stalks somebody they're dating with to see their relationships, see what's going on in their lives, look at their family, their children. So that's a little hard to swallow, but that's her story, I guess. And anyway, she is sticking with it. And then we go on in the discovery, and we've briefly talked about this before, but how poorly planned or thought out this crime was. It's been reported in the affidavit for arrest warrants and the interview that Mr. Watts gives the police that he ultimately confesses to when he goes in for an interview and a polygraph examination, okay? And this is my personal opinion as someone who has practiced law for 24 years, primarily doing criminal defense. A polygraph test is nothing more than a tool of interrogation. And if you ever want to see an example of that, you take a look at the discovery in the Watts case where the agents come in from CBI and basically get a full background on Mr. Watts. They talk to him about his growing up, his childhood, where he went to school, all those things that you normally don't get unless it is part of an interrogation. You're trying to find something, some weakness to exploit to get somebody to talk. And in this particular case, the police were able to get him to talk. And when I say it's a tool of interrogation, from the time he went in to start this polygraph to the time that he ended it and was arrested, it was some 6.5 hours, okay? And the actual polygraph was 3 questions. And that's really all you have to do in a polygraph. Okay, here we are. Let's get some information from you. I'm going to ask you these questions. They tell you the questions in advance. This is what we're going to ask. And then they do the baseline. It basically says, hey, is your name Scott? And they have you intentionally lie. Okay, no. Is your name Scott? No. And it kind of establishes the baseline of where the little charts and everything, the little needles on the charts go from. So he knows the questions, but they use it as a tool in this particular case to get him to talk, and talk he does. And throughout the interrogation of Mr. Watts, like I said, he gives all the information from where he went to school, that he went to NASCAR school, that he was an auto mechanic, that he really wanted to do that. He basically came to Colorado for, he and his wife, fresh start. They had some friends that came out here. He was working as an auto mechanic. Then he ultimately gets work for Anadarko, working basically as a roustabout, doing oil well servicing. And, he's living this double life. And he walks them through that. And he says that he ultimately confesses. He even takes a break, goes and talks to his dad. They are videotaping the interview. He tells his dad that, he killed Shanann, but it's only after he had watched her kill one of the children and then saw that the other one was already dead. And so it's just very, very interesting how they did that, but they broke him down. I would love to see the video of that, because over the course of 6.5 hours, like I said, he's hungry. They offer him pizza. And at one point they even describe, when they talk about the size of the hole that the daughters were in the tank, he says, well, it's about double the size of a paper plate, that was the size of the hole that he put his daughters into. And so they're talking to him. At the same time, you have detectives out at the well site where he was working at that day, and they had the information from his GPS from his truck from Anadarko Petroleum. It was a company vehicle, so they could get all that information. And they're doing all that they can, and they're investigating and actually see up above the sheets that are there, and they go dig it up, and they find them out there. And ultimately, at the same time, Mr. Watts is confessing, and he then shows them where the grave would be found, and he describes how he had the sheet there. He didn't know what to do with it. He was so scared, but he also took the kids' little stuffed animals, when he was taking them out. And, I wouldn't say they broke him, but I would love to see how he denied. And the officers, it's very detailed. It's very interesting how the officers explained to him that, we need to know what's going on. Were the children alive? Who did this? I mean, it's very, very good police work. I am not going to dispute that at all. It's very good police work. My hats are off to the Frederick Police Department, Carl Beer Investigation, Weld County Sheriff. They really did a really good job. And the detective that was out at the well site, it's like, hey, let me go fly this drone out there. This is like 9 o'clock in the morning. In the meantime, he's out there flying around and he's finding this information and he's in contact with the detectives and they're saying, hey, he just confessed and here it is. But throughout his confession, he always maintains, and he never says otherwise other than in court, that Shanann was killed because he just lost it, because he had witnessed her kill one of the children and then the other. Now understand, he pled guilty to killing all three of them and his unborn son. So he confesses, and basically he's taken off to jail. And then where it gets absolutely somewhat horrifying, and I think, most people, unless you deal with this kind of stuff on a daily basis, I think unfortunately we become somewhat numb to it. But that the detectives are out there. They get word that the bodies of the girls are in the tanks, the oil tanks, and that the body of Shanann is in the shallow grave, and they find it. And he had described how basically he took 20 minutes to dig that shallow grave because he knew other people were showing up at the work site, and he had to get it done. He panicked. He didn't know what to do. It's described. The police, they knew from the beginning he did it. They knew from the beginning. They did not believe his story at all. They knew he was lying. They knew about the girlfriend and didn't confront him until the very end. They always bring the suspect in last when they think they've got just enough and they try to see if he's going to break. And if he had kept his mouth shut, it'd be a complete game changer. And understand, ladies and gentlemen, this is from the criminal defense perspective. From reading the discovery, I would have filed a motion to suppress that statement, basically based upon psychological coercion. And I've won that motion where statements can be thrown out. And guess what? If you throw out that statement, those bodies may not come in. There may not be a murder case. Now, the prosecution would probably, inevitable discovery, or we already found Shanann's body, we would have found the girl's body as well. But I really don't think that the detectives had any idea that the girls were in those tanks until they were told by Mr. Watts. And if you prevail on that motion to suppress, they have no evidence. Mr. Watts could have walked away. But ultimately, he directed his attorneys to go cut him a deal. So that's that. Anyway, so the detectives are out there. They find out that the bodies are in there. And the detectives had learned that the little girls were killed. And he asked them, how did the girls get into the tank? And he says he lowered them in feet first. So he's holding them by their hands and he shoved them in there. And the detectives are asking him how they were able to fit. Did you have to cut, dismember, break any body parts to get them to fit in that tiny hole? And he said no, that he basically just squeezed them in there, so to speak, pushed them down there. And he described how he thought it was different levels of oil based upon the splash that was in there. Actually, somewhat kind of disturbing. You think it's his children, let alone just children in general. And then as you go on to read, the efforts that the detectives in Anadarko Petroleum gets word that they believe that there are 2 children in these tanks. They call in the cavalry. They call in everybody they need to get the oil out of those tanks. They called in their tanker trucks. They had welders. They had crews. Anadarko, like I said, they called in the cavalry. They moved with expeditious speed, and even then it still took some time. And when they had drained the tanks, they gained access, and it was unclear whether they unbolted it or actually had to cut it via welding, that there was about 4 inches of crude oil in the bottom of those tanks, and that the detectives that were there had to don their hazardous suits. And they describe how they go into the first tank, and I believe the child was face down, and the other one, the child was face up, or vice versa. It really doesn't matter. But that they have to go and pick them up, and they're covered in just this crude, and they put them on the ground, and as they're carrying the one little girl, basically her skin comes off as they're carrying her out, and then the other one, they put her on the plastic, lay her out to try to clean her up a little bit so they can, help identify her and things of that nature. So they're putting them in the body bag, and as they pick her up, some of the skin from decomposition is actually coming off of her as well. And, just think, these small children, I mean, just absolutely terrible that they, one, had to die like that, and then two, just to be thrown away into, a crude oil tank. I just cannot imagine what kind of human being could do that. And so if you read those pages, it's actually, like I said, it's very, it gives you pause. It gives you pause and makes you think, wow, there are bad people in the world, and you can chalk it up to being completely scared, or you can chalk it up to evilness. You decide. We're just here to talk about it. So ultimately, then, they go back for the autopsies. He confesses, or not. Mr. Watts doesn't make any more confessions, but he pleads guilty, which is basically the ultimate confession. And so here we are. And then the question becomes, where does this leave everybody? Families are gone. They've all gone back to North Carolina. Mr. Watts is now in prison, and I think we have a photo of him at DRDC. He's shaved his beard and looks like he got himself a haircut. Almost doesn't look like Mr. Watts. It could be he's trying to change his identity so people maybe don't put two and two together from the guy that they see on TV. And then you have, Miss Kessinger. Who knows what she's going to do? Is she going to just go away? Is she going to write a book? Is she going to tell her story? It's interesting that people are still talking about it, and people are upset that she would do anything about this. She did go forward to the police. Was it because she's a very good person? I'd like to think so. Or is it because she was trying to cut the situation off at the pass and protect her? Did she say something to him that put something in his head that, hey, this is the only way you're going to be with me, is you need to get rid of the wife and kids because we're not going to be doing this? Or is it simply a case of a guy that just didn't like reality and couldn't handle it, and so he killed his wife and kids? But if you have the time and you want to see some really good police work, there are 1,960 pages of the discovery. You can find it online. We'll try to put a link to it as well. And there's really some really, really good police work. When I used to teach classes to young budding police officers years and years ago, this is like almost 20 years ago, I would tell them it usually came down to whether the bad guy walked or not was whether the paperwork had it written out neatly. Here, in this particular case, the officers wrote their reports. They saved all of their notes, as they were ordered to do at the request of the public defender's office. And it looks like also, not only just from the notes from the public defender's office or the request for those to be preserved, but that the district attorney's office may have directed them to do that because they knew this was such a serious case and they didn't want to do anything to jeopardize that. And so it's really, really good investigation. And about page, I think, 552 is a really good kind of a recap of the investigation, and then ultimately the interrogation of Mr. Watts with the polygraph examination really is a good description, and it shows really good police work. I still think may have crossed the line, but I couldn't tell you until I saw the video, and those haven't been turned over yet. The other thing is in today's world, everything is videotaped, and so you have to go through and actually watch those videotapes. Because oftentimes I get a nice little report, and it says this is what happened, and it says see other details in the video that goes for 3.5 hours. And so you have to watch it to see if that's exactly what happened. Over the course of 6.5 hours, they did write some pretty nice reports in this particular case, but I'd still like to see the video and see what was going on and just look at Mr. Watts' body language and image, but body language and how he was conducting himself. So we're going to leave it there, ladies and gentlemen. Please, look at the discovery. Let's talk about it. All right, that's what it comes down to. And if you leave a comment, let's be respectful. Like I said, we're not here. We're not the pro Shanann fan club. We're not the pro Chris Watts Shanann fan club. We are simply here to talk about the facts and try to give you some analysis more than what you'd get on the evening news. And I hope that's why you tuned into the channel. If you like the channel, please subscribe. If you want to leave a comment, please do so. Be polite, respectful. I mean, that's what I like about, being an attorney, is there's still respect in the world. One side speaks, the other side speaks, and then, in court, the judge will make the decision or a jury makes the decision. But everybody's still polite and respectful. I actually got people that left comments that said I was being too nice by calling Mr. Watts at some point a gentleman or Mr. Watts. It's just habit, ladies and gentlemen. It's just called being polite and respectful and conducting yourself in a manner. We don't have to go around calling everybody names. Don't get me wrong. I can throw those names around like anybody else. But, that's what separates, the professionals, is to keep the decorum. Otherwise, our legal system may have its flaws, but it's still better than anywhere else in the world. And if we start reducing ourselves to simply name calling, then we're simply nothing more than some third world despot country whereby, the decision's already made before he came out. So this case has enough for everybody. If you're a supporter of Shanann, you can say she's an absolute victim. If you're a supporter of Chris Watts, you can say that he was an abused husband and acted in, a rational way, what have you. There's enough for everybody. Oh, one more thing I wanted to talk about. As I was scrolling through here, I noticed it. All the ladies that have sent letters to Mr. Watts for his prayers and basically how good looking you are, and here's a photograph of me. All right. Wow. Okay. Throughout the practice of law, this will not be the first time where I've had clients that have come in and I've been retained, and let's say the guy's in jail and he's got a girlfriend who's working 2 jobs, raising 3 kids, but he just can't seem to find a job, or he's beat her up so bad that she's wearing sunglasses and what have you, but she's there and going to support him. And it never ceases to amaze me because I had an associate. She was a very attractive young woman, and she joked, I'm a professional. I have a law degree. I can make my own money. I don't need anybody. And she couldn't find a nice guy. And she joked about it, that this guy is a complete deadbeat, selling dope, beating up his wife, not taking care of any of his responsibilities, but he's got ladies coming all over the place looking to be his girlfriend. Never ceases to amaze me. Ladies, I think you all can do better. I think in any relationship, if as a prerequisite to disqualifying them as the dating potential is, 1, they're never getting out of prison, and 2, if they've ever murdered anybody. I think that should be on the list of potential disqualifiers. But do as you may. I just still find it hard to believe. There's lots of good guys out there, ladies. You don't need to go to the man murdering his wife and children as your first hope. All right. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Look at the discovery. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and like and hit that little subscribe bell if you want to be notified of any future editions of Crime Talk. Have a great day. I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon about this case and many others. Thank you and have a great day.